How often do you water your garden? Is it every day? Is it twice a week? Is it once a week? Well, there is no magic number for how often you should be watering your garden, because it depends on so many variables like the size of your garden, the types of plants that you have, the season, the weather, and even the soil that you have in your garden beds. And so today we now talk about all those variables, so that you can determine how often you should be watering your garden. The basics of watering your garden is really pretty simple. We want to make sure that we giving enough water to the roots of our plants, and we don't want to leave the foliage wet, because that promotes disease. But what does enough water mean? How much water is enough? Well, most sources say that about an inch of water per week is enough for your garden. But again, that's just a starting point, and it depends on what type of soil you have. Whether it's sandy soil, whether it's clay soil, whether it's well draining, or if it retains moisture really well. It also depends on the weather that you're having. If you're having hot, dry weather where you live, then you're going to need to water more frequently than if you're having cool, moist weather where you live. And of course, if you have newly planted things, they're going to need more water than established plants. So just keep all that in mind when you're trying to figure out how much water to give your plants. A couple rules of thumb when it comes to watering your garden. The first rule is to water deeply and slowly. This is very important. You want to make sure that the water is actually getting down to the roots. A lot of times people will run their sprinklers or their hoses and water the surface of the soil, but the water never makes it down to where the roots are at. And so the roots end up dying because they never get the water they need. So, if you're going to run your sprinklers, make sure that you run them long enough to where the water is actually getting down to the roots. Another thing that you can do to make sure that the water is getting down to the roots is to try to avoid watering during the heat of the day. If you water during the heat of the day, a lot of that water is going to evaporate before it even reaches the roots of your plants. So it is best to water in the morning, so that way the water has a chance to penetrate down to the roots before it evaporates. Another good rule to follow when it comes to watering your garden is to water when the soil is dry. This is an easy one, but a lot of times we get caught up in thinking that we have to water on a set schedule. Maybe we think that we have to water every day, or maybe we think that we have to water twice a week. But really what you should be doing is checking your soil moisture, sticking your finger in the soil and only watering when the top few inches of the soil are dry. This way you're not overwatering your plants, which can lead to root rot and other problems. And speaking of overwatering, another rule to follow is to avoid water logging your garden. Water logging happens when the soil is so wet that it suffocates the plant roots. This is especially common in areas where the soil doesn't drain well. So, if you have heavy clay soil, you're more prone to water logging. So, if you see that your soil is staying wet for days or even weeks at a time, you might have a water logging problem. Another rule to follow is to consider your soil type. Like I mentioned earlier, sandy soils need to be watered more frequently than clay or loamy soils because sandy soils drain more quickly. So if you have sandy soils, you might need to water your plants every day or even multiple times a day, especially during hot, dry weather. On the other hand, if you have clay soils, you might only need to water every other day, or even just once a week. Because the water is going to stay in the soil for much longer, another rule to follow is to water to the depth of the root. This is a great rule to follow if you're trying to encourage deep root growth. To do this, you want to make sure that you're rewatering deeply enough to saturate the soil to the depth of the plant's roots. This can help encourage the roots to grow deeper, which will make your plants more drought tolerant in the future. Another rule to follow is to adjust to the weather. Obviously, hot, dry weather is going to require more frequent watering than cool, wet weather. So you'll need to adjust how often you're rewatering based on the weather that you're having. During hot, dry periods, you might need to water daily or even multiple times a day. But during cooler, wetter periods, you might only need to water once a week or even less. And finally, probably the most important rule to follow when it comes to watering your garden is to avoid getting the leaves wet. Getting the leaves wet can promote fungal diseases, especially if the leaves stay wet for extended periods of time. So try to direct the water to the base of the plants and avoid watering overhead. You can do this by using a soaker hose or drip irrigation. These methods of watering help to ensure that the water is going directly to the roots and not on the leaves. So those are my rules for watering your garden. There's not a magic number for how often you should be watering your garden. But hopefully, these rules will help you determine how often you should be watering based on the conditions in your own garden. Just remember to water deeply and slowly. Water in the morning. Check the soil moisture. Avoid waterlogging. Consider your soil type. Water to the root depth. Adjust to the weather and don't water the leaves. Now, in addition to knowing how often you should be watering your garden, it's also important to know how to water your garden efficiently. Here are some tips for watering your garden efficiently. First, water in short cycles. This means that you should water your garden for a short period of time and then turn the water off and let the soil absorb the water. It's better to water a little bit every day than to run your sprinklers for hours on end. So instead of running your sprinklers for 20 minutes straight, try running them for 10 minutes. Turning them off for a day and then running them again for 10 minutes. This will allow the soil to absorb the water and it will prevent runoff. Another tip for watering your garden efficiently is to capture rainwater. Rainwater is a great way to water your garden because it's free and it's already filtered. So you don't have to worry about any chemicals or anything like that being in the water. So, if you have the ability to capture rainwater, definitely do that. You can do this by setting up a barrel or a cistern to collect rainwater from your roof. Another tip is to group plants with similar water needs together. This means that you should plant all of your succulents and cacti together, all of your vegetables together, and all of your shrubs and trees together. This way you can water each group of plants separately and you won't have to water the entire garden at once. Hopefully, now you have a better idea of how often you should be watering your garden. Remember, there's no magic number. But hopefully, these tips and rules will help you determine how often you should be watering based on the conditions in your own garden. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, thanks for watching.